Good morning and welcome to Walk the Talk, our version of a podcast where you walk if you want to while we do the talking. We don't want to be adding to your virtual fatigue, so if you're up for it, plug in your earphones and listen while you take us on a walk, around the house or around the block. Use the next 45 minutes to move your body and nourish your mind. I'm Sean, one of the co-founders and trainers at Point 3 Wellbeing, and I will be hosting today's Walk the Talk, the next in our series aimed at HR professionals, business leaders, and those interested in mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. Over the coming months, Walk the Talk will be having conversations and learning more, and hopefully sharing some of that learning with you, the listeners, about different workplace demographics, from both experts and individuals within that demographic. We hope this will be an opportunity to create greater connection and understanding for others in the workplace. This can only lead to positive outcomes in the workplace and beyond. This episode, we will be shining a light on Generation Z, a demographic that at Point 3, we can't claim to know too much about, sadly. We're a little bit older than the Generation Zers. So to help us with this conversation, we've got some fantastic panelists on today's episode who I'm delighted to introduce you to now. So we've got Emma Richardson, who is the Learning and Development Advisor at Carpmaels Ransford, an intellectual property law firm. And she will be bringing her perspective from working with graduates as they transition from the campus to the corporate world. And she's been working in learning and development for the past 10 years. Emma, do you want to quickly say hello?
Good morning. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Sean.
Great. Thanks for joining, Emma. I've also got with me Jay Richards, who's the co-founder and CEO at Imagen Insights. Now, for the past 2 years, they've been carrying out insights and research into Generation Z. Imagen Insights' mission is to give Generation Z a platform to voice their opinions, shape their futures, and drive change. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, my friend. Glad to be here.
Great stuff. And finally, I'd like to welcome our Generation Z expert. He's lived it, he's breathed it. It's Thomas Arkell, a third-year student studying mechanical engineering at the University of Bristol, who is very much looking to share some of that lived and breathed Generation Z experience with us today. So Thomas, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
So to the live audience, before we do get going, should you have any questions for our panelists, then throw them into the Q&A and we will try to answer them as we go. And before we get into this conversation proper, let's quickly set the scene. Generation Z, for those of you who don't know, these are individuals born between 1997 and 2012, making Generation Z anywhere from around 10 to 25 years of age. Now, often described as Zoomers and digital natives, due to being the first generation to have grown up with access to internet and digital technology, Generation Z have lived through uncertain and challenging times. For the older ones in the demographic, they will have seen the challenges their parents experienced through the financial crisis back in 2008. And then, of course, face their own challenges at pivotal points in their lives, with the impact potentially impacting their work as they've just start out in their new career, or impacting their university of experience. So with Generation Z being the newest crop of talent entering the workplace, we felt it important to understand more about the leaders of tomorrow and what we can do within the workplace to support them as they move from campus to corporate. So let's start with some of the science and the theory around Generation Z. And I'm going to hand over to Jay at this point. So my first question is, I'm hoping you can provide us with some further insight into Generation Z. I know over at Imagen Insights, you've just released the Brutally Honest Gen Z report, and they basically say this will help you to understand those things you can't find on Google. We will link to this in the show notes after. And in this report, they've spoken to Generation Z to identify their common values, wants, needs, and worries. So Jay, are you able to share some of your findings with us from this report?
Yeah, so again, thank you for having me, guys. It's a real honor to be here. So I'm going to start off really with who are Gen Z. So a lot of people don't actually understand. So it depends who you talk to. If you talk to the Americans, they'd be saying their age between 10 years old all the way up to 24. If you talk to the Australians, they would say 10 years old up to 26. So it depends who you're getting in the conversation with. But there's three characteristics really that stand out about Gen Z. So the first thing is that they're activists. So you see anything that's happening around the world, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's climate change or gender equality, Gen Z are normally the ones leading the charts. They're normally the ones at the front, making all the noise and making us millennials look like we don't know what we're talking about. The second part is that they are co-creators. So with millennials, we want to be the ones on the podcast. We want to be the ones doing all the talking. We want to be the ones that I'm the CEO, look how important I am. With Gen Z, they just want to create cool things with cool people. TikTok is a prime example of this, where you see the duet feature where people could just jump on the back of something and add value to it and make it go even more viral. So the second thing is, they're co-creators. And then the last thing is that they are digital natives. So we've heard this a billion times before. They grew up with technology. They understand it in ways that that a lot of us older folk, I speak for myself, we don't understand. And I think the great thing is that they've grown up in a generation where things are constantly changing. Every day there's new technology, every day there's a new platform, something new to engage with. So they're constantly used to adapting, like you alluded to in your intro a second ago. But our report is an amazing report. You can download it straight from our website. But a few key things to point out is that 0% of our community say that they trust brands. They were saying that if they're going to trust anybody as a source of information, it will be their family. And then secondly, scientists. I think scientists probably came up because of the COVID pandemic, but it's there all the same. 3% of our community said that they are looking to buy a car in the next 5 years. It's a lot lower than we thought. And Thomas and I were speaking like this just before the podcast started about not needing a car. And especially if you're in a major city. But there's loads of amazing statistics in there. I won't take up all the time talking and waffling on, but there's loads of amazing statistics in there you can find via the website. Download the report and we'll send it to your email.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jay. And that's really interesting to hear that maybe Chris Whitty is going to be the next big influencer in there. All about hearing from those scientists. But it's also great to hear, I guess, that maybe they don't feel this need to be front and center of attention at all points, such as maybe potentially millennials have. And finally, just that final point you've made there around kind of listening to those brands and maybe not truly believing what those brands are having to say. It's lovely to actually hear that they respect, by the sounds of it, the thoughts and vision of family members, friends, and I guess those around them as well. So, Thomas, I'm going to come over to you next, if you don't mind. So, I guess, does this ring true for you in showing how you've kind of grown up in the past through these kind of challenging, potentially, but certainly uncertain times? You're obviously grown up in the age of the internet and social media. The pandemic has really impacted your university career. How has this shaped kind of your values, beliefs, connections, and kind of just general kind of views of the world?
Okay, well, I think first off, everything Jay said just resonates completely and is just spot on how I think about it. But really, I can't speak much about stuff in like the financial crisis, but more recently, the uncertainty with COVID and everything, it's kind of changed experiences that would otherwise be so kind of standard. It's just turned everything upside down, but it's for the better. It's kind of helped us, it's built our resilience, I think, and it's helped us to deal with uncertainty in other aspects of life. And so kind of I'm trying to pull positives, of course, from this awful thing. But in that sense, you know, living through uncertainty is something that we've all got to kind of deal with and get over. And that's helped with that. As far as being digital native, it's like having all this information at your fingertips is brilliant, and it's something that like young people like myself can just pick up, and you can just figure out how things work quickly. But it's also kind of feels like we're kind of engulfed. There's too much of it sometimes, especially with things like TikTok and stuff and Instagram Reels. You get sucked in and you get stuck, and it's also kind of makes individuals it's certainly made me more impatient. If you can't find something immediately, then yeah. So there are definitely lots of good things about this, but it comes with its drawbacks, and it's not all sunshine and rainbows, eh? So
I think
Absolutely.
it's super interesting. Sorry, Sean. I think it's super interesting what Thomas was saying there about the idea of being stuck, and I think that's something that really sums up this entire period of time for this demographic, because it's really, you were meant to be doing certain things. Like Thomas was saying, I was meant to be doing this. It was just going to be standard, and it just wasn't standard. It just paused and kind of hasn't really gone back to normal. And I think as adults, sometimes as people over not in this demographic, like over 24, 25 years old, for us, it's hard to get our minds around the idea of things that were just like a rite of passage for us have just been complete and utterly annihilated in this demographic. And I think it's going to be very interesting over the next 20 to 30 years to see the data that comes out around how Gen Z are just dealing with trauma and dealing with crisis, because they've just been thrown in the midst of this. And I love my final point is what Thomas was alluding to when he said, when he spoke about the idea of almost compassion fatigue, because you're constantly overwhelmed with, like, even me, I can't read the news as much as I used to. I go on there and I just see all of these things that happen around the world, and I kind of just blankly look at it all, because we're just constantly overwhelmed on TikTok, on Instagram, whatever it may be. It's hard to almost switch off. I definitely think Thomas, really good points there, dude.
Yeah, and I think there's some fantastic points there. And what it shows is that nothing is all good or all bad. Actually, what is so powerful is about living through these uncertain times is I think it probably takes away that sense of potentially entitlement that maybe millennials have, that we deserve this, not for any reason other than we just simply feel like we do. But actually, that uncertainty has led to, and Thomas, really, really good to highlight that resilience that's being built. And I tell you what, in the modern world, in life or in the workplace, actually, the more resilience that we can have, the more adept we will be at coping with challenges as they inevitably, and they most certainly will inevitably start to present themselves at different points through those lives. And potentially we might be able to say that millennials haven't been the best at dealing with those challenges, but hopefully this uncomfortable experience, this impact that it's had on your university career, for instance, from halfway through first year up until, and you're now nearly halfway through your third year, the fact that you've not been able to get out there and socialize and forge those connections in the same way as many generations before have been, will of course have its impact. But also, as you've said, you can look at the positive amongst that, and that's really great to hear. So moving into kind of this workplace, Emma, I'm going to come to you next. As someone that has been in the learning and development team with kind of millennials before this entering the workforce, and now seeing Generation Z as they start to make their transition from campus to the corporate world, have you noticed a change in behavior, thinking, wants and needs as you take graduates on their first steps into the workplace?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely been a transition over the time that I've been working with people coming into the workplace. I think it was always traditionally thought before that increasing salaries will increase engagement, and it's definitely becoming more widely understood and accepted that there are much deeper drivers and motivators that factor into that engagement. And that general trend, I think, will continue to be taken forward at an accelerated rate as Gen Z becomes more prevalent in the workplace. So Gen Z in our IP firm are the juniors in our business services and our trainee patent attorneys, and they already account for 20% of our employees. So we already have to be paying attention to the fact that their drivers are slightly different and what their thoughts and feelings are around things. A key thing that I've seen, which is great for me as a learning and development professional, is that there's a real push for well-being and learning and development, not only for career progression. So this probably resonates along the lines of not always needing to be front and center, but wanting to also be co-creators. So to make work more fulfilling and more meaningful, you can develop within your current position. Obviously, many of them will still look for the career progression as well, but I think that thought process is already starting to influence people in other generations who were perhaps outnumbered in that thinking before. And a key thing that I've seen in the past few years is that the generation coming through has a lot more honesty around their thoughts and feelings, and So it's interesting to hear about their feelings of excitement about coming to the workplace, but also the really early admission of overwhelm and such a different environment and such a lot to take in. And as they're making that switch into the workplace, certainly, I mean, 10 years ago when I was working with millennials at the beginning of my career, they were acting very similarly to me as millennials, scared to say if something didn't make sense or if they didn't understand, scared to say you didn't know something, it might show you up, putting on a brave face, trying to work it out, trying not to show weakness. But the conversations that I'm having in recent years show a much healthier level of openness and transparency. And really, they want that back too, in a much bigger way than I've seen in previous years.
That is really interesting. I love that sense that Generation Z are really looking for that sense of fulfillment from their job. It's more than simply, how much can this pay me, or how good will this make me look? It's actually that sense of fulfillment. There's not that need to be up there in the shining lights. It's about what is it that we are creating together to create something that's going to have that impact, that's going to help me feel fulfilled. And of course, the knock-on effects of doing those jobs that bring that are going to be so positive. Now, in June 2021, Deloitte released an insights paper focused on millennials and Generation Z. And what they've said is that Generation Z are making mental health at work a priority. From this, they've identified that the job prospects are #1 stress driver for Gen Z at this moment in time, with 50% saying it contributed to stress levels. But it's fantastic to hear that actually, from what you're saying, Emma, they are open to kind of sharing, at least to some point in your business and in your experience, the fact that they are feeling overwhelmed. I certainly know that back when I was starting out, it was put on a brave face and it was just get on with it. But Thomas, as someone that's currently considering their career move from that campus to corporate space, what are the driving things that you want to see from your future employers? Is there anything in particular that really stands out for you?
Well, I'd say, like, more generally, everyone I know, it sounds silly, but everyone I know my age just kind of wants to have a good time. And so in the workplace, that will translate to like a better work-life balance. Maybe like the idea of a 4-day week has been battered around a lot these days, which may seem extreme, but it may just be other things like the sense of having a sense of fulfillment that makes you enjoy your work, or being like in a safe, friendly environment at work. I don't think salary is necessarily #1 priority anymore. It's just kind of being somewhere that you're comfortable and you can have fun, and somewhere that allows you to have fun outside of work, where there's no stress that's like residual stress when you go home or stuff like that. That's
I think that's really interesting, Thomas. You've mentioned there straight away, the very first point was around actually having fun kind of in life, but actually work and life, they are intertwined so heavily. And so that should also come through in the career. I think maybe as millennials, we've very much seen it as our career is there to create maybe status, but it's not necessarily there as a means to give us fun, enjoyment, which actually is probably a big thing that we've missed out on. And then also you've mentioned the 4-day week. Hey, I'm fully behind the 4-day week. I am fully behind that, Thomas. So do not feel that that's too out there. We are very much pushing for that at Point 3 wellbeing, certainly within our own business. Emma, do you think that's something that, Carpmaels and Ransford might be open to at some point, maybe the 4-day week for those Generation Z?
It's really hard to see how that might translate into a law firm, and with clients all over the world, whilst many of them continue working 5 days, the expectations of the people who provide professional services to them will probably be that we're available. Certainly many firms outside of where I'm working now have a tendency to in some places work incredibly long hours in order to service their clients properly. So I think it will be interesting to see which way it goes. I certainly think our culture at our firm would consider it if it looks like everyone else is going there, but their clients will have to come first.
Of course. And in a client-led kind of service industry, you are often at the beck and call of that. But it's interesting to hear that already 20% of your workforce are Generation Z. And so that clamour might start to get a little bit louder. What I also love hearing is that actually Thomas and his friends at university are talking already about what are they actually looking for in their career. I mean, this is much bigger thinking than I was ever doing at university. And these conversations can only lead to a good thing. Jay, I'm just going to come back to you. In fact, your report really does align to what Thomas has said, in that 34% of Gen Z value happiness, 25% that work-life balance, and only 11% reported that earnings were a top priority for them at work, which certainly seems to be a huge shift from previous generations' thinking. You've also highlighted that Generation Z are looking at portfolio careers. Are you able to share some insight into why this might be, and any thoughts on how employers can support this?
Yeah. At first, I'm just happy that our data matched up with what Thomas was saying, because it would have been an absolute logistical.
It's nice when that happens.
Trust me, I would have been like, anyway, close that to but yeah, no, definitely. I think it's an interesting one. And when I speak to a lot of brands or folks that are going to be recruiting Gen Z, and there's almost this fear, like there's this demographic coming in that are just going to be excruciatingly demanding, whatever it may be. But the interesting thing is, they just want to learn. They're not coming in from a perspective, they're not coming from a perspective of just wanting to demand things. They want to learn, but they also want to express their opinion and be clear and say, hey, these are my values, and the way you've been living for these last 40 years in the office space is archaic. It's not the way we should be living. So I'm just coming in saying, this is how I think the future should be. And the crazy thing is, I think there's going to be a balance, like Emma was saying, is in certain industries, it will be very hard to switch to a 4-day week. But like with our team internally, we work 10 till 4. And my common explanation for that, when people ask me, is like, well, if you can't do your job specifically in the industry that we work in, if you can't do your job in 6 hours, you're just bad at your job. It's not the fact that you need longer hours. Because I remember working at previous firms where you'd have 9-hour, 10-hour days, but I would see people just wandering around for 2 hours, just waffling or going for cigarette breaks every 15 minutes. So I think it's the Gen Z are coming in going, okay, actually, you know what? I'd rather work shorter hours or work less days, but in those periods of time I'm at work, I'm going to be grafting. And I think these common misconception of Gen Z, they're just lazy, or you see a lot of it on TikTok where people are like, oh, this generation just doesn't care, they're lazy, so on. But actually they do. They really do care. They want to add value. They want to learn, and they want to graft. And I think it's just giving them the opportunity to do that, and understanding how some of the ways that we've thought as employers, like myself or bigger firms, it's actually understanding that it's actually quite archaic, and we can actually change some of these ways and alter the way we work in certain industries. I don't think this is a blanket rule for every industry, because I wouldn't like if my doctors were only working a certain number of days a week. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I definitely think it's an interesting one for sure.
I think it's great that this generation are willing to come in and challenge that norm, that way of work that has worked in the past, but actually, in fact, as we're moving through this transition, as technology is becoming so prevalent, actually those 9 to 5 and maybe longer in certain industries, hours that we've traditionally worked, well, that's been great when we've not had technology and we've not had our phones on us and we've always been contactable. But I think one of the big challenges that is coming in recent years is that, of course, with technology, it means that no longer are you shutting down your laptop at the end of the day and you're going home and that's it, you're done for work. Actually, now you're going home and you've still got that laptop with you potentially. You've certainly got your phone with you. You are most definitely contactable through a whole host of different means, which means that naturally, generations are before Generation Z are certainly just logging straight back on and carrying on with that workload, even though the environment has moved from office to home. And that, of course, is going to have an impact. So I think it's really interesting that Generation Z are coming in and they are looking at, actually, let's do things a little bit differently. Maybe we're a little bit more flexible with those working hours. It doesn't mean that necessarily work shorter, but maybe we're a bit more efficient when we do that work. To really kind of create that impact, and just starting to change that thinking from 9 to 5 being the working day, and that's just how it will be forevermore. So I love the fact that they're willing to come in, open that conversation, and at least at that point, businesses can make a decision as to how they work. But it's always good to kind of review and reflect on what's actually working. So at Point 3 is a business that's very much focused on helping people in the workplace to stress less and smile more. We believe that talking about mental health and well-being is a very powerful way to do this. Now, of course, every generation will, generally speaking, have varying degrees of comfort when it comes to talking about mental health and well-being. And I would love to dive a little bit into this now and get an understanding as to where Generation Z are at with having this sometimes, well, certainly for the generations before, uncomfortable conversation. So my first question on the topic is back to you, Thomas, as our resident Generation Zer. I would love to hear firsthand how the topic of mental health shows up for you and your friends. Is this a topic that you think about on an individual level, and is it openly talked about amongst your peers on campus and outside of the campus environment?
It's not talked about a whole lot, I must say. It's certainly something that I'd feel comfortable talking to my friends and loved ones I believe would feel comfortable talking to me about if they ever had any issues. But it's not the sort of conversation that is just kind of, there's still certainly a stigma attached to talking about mental health and stuff like that, and well-being. And but I'd say on a larger scale, there's definitely a lot more going on these days that is really spreading awareness and raising money for charities that deal with that kind of solve these issues. Like, for example, at uni specifically, the Movember movement is really taken off. Like all the sports teams are raising hundreds of pounds that go towards, like, specifically men's mental health and well-being. And so it's definitely going in the right direction, but there's still kind of work and progress to be made in that sense.
Yeah, of course. And I think these things, these kind of big shifts in thinking certainly don't change overnight, but it's great to hear that at your university and in your experience, at least you feel like people could come and talk to you about it. For me personally, my own experience at university was, this wasn't a conversation that was even close. I had never actually put the word mental and the word health together. I'd never combined these two things. It'd never been on my radar. So the fact that things like Movember are kind of obviously really prevalent, raising just the general awareness is the first step to then taking some really positive action. Now, Emma Codd, who's the Deloitte Global Inclusion Leader, says that if business leaders want to actively help millennials and Gen Zs to thrive at work, they need to prioritize mental health and a better workplace culture where stigma does not exist. Of course, easier said than done. But why is that so important? Well, as a generation who certainly seem more open talking about mental health, certainly amongst themselves, stigma is still an issue in the workplace. The Deloitte paper goes on to say, whilst experiencing increased stress and anxiety in the workplace, they remain hesitant about vocalizing these challenges at work, with nearly 6 in 10 saying that they did not tell their leader how they were feeling. So it certainly kind of comes back to that experience that I had in the workplace. But for me, it was actually, I had zero awareness around mental health. So I just didn't really know how I was feeling. I was a young man. I very rarely knew what emotions were. But as leaders, managers, and colleagues, it's important that we look at ways to reduce stigma in the workplace, to support one another and enable the newest generations of employees to bring their whole selves into the workplace. So coming over to you, Emma, we know that stigma is obviously one of the biggest reasons why people aren't opening up about their struggles. And it's something that Thomas has just mentioned. What do you do as a business to break down the stigma around mental health in the workplace and create that safe environment for the graduates, of which you said kind of 20% of your workforce kind of sit within this? And the second part of this question, what are those things that you've done that have had the greatest impact to break down stigma within your organization?
I think it's a really interesting point that mental health is spoken about now, and in the workplace at all, like you say, and I think it happens a lot more. Certainly, we talk about it as soon as people walk in the door. It's part of every new joiner's induction on their first day. We signpost the things that we have, make sure that there's easily accessible things on our intranet. I'm sure many companies already do all of that. Of course, we also work with Point 3 early on in people joining the firm to try and consciously get them to think about what helps to build and nurture their resilience, encouraging them to try and start making healthy habits as part of their work routine right from the very beginning. A few of our early careers people have said that they were quite surprised that we spoke about it so early, and that we kind of prioritized that. And I think as much as it's spoken about, it's very easy to have conversations about mental health when we're talking hypothetically and when we're talking about it generally. But I think there probably is still a stigma when it comes to actually saying something if there's something wrong. So one thing that we try to do to ensure that the conversation continues is to keep it being mentioned on a regular basis. So we have a firm newsletter that goes out monthly. We have mental health first aiders at the firm, and each month one of them takes a slot to share advice and just things that they've been thinking about recently, so that they're always visible and so that mental well-being and health becomes part of day-to-day conversations. And we also focus on, probably more so than just helping yourself, encouraging people to actually look out for signs in other people, because that, we all know, particularly as bright professionals, it's going to be that much harder. I think there still will be the person who feels like they know all the things that they should be doing, but they're not quite sure how to reach out and say, okay, I do actually need some help, especially in the workplace. I think that millennial concern of not looking good enough is probably still going to be pervasive in Gen Zers as well. And so encouraging people to look out for other people, and if you spot something first, you can start that conversation, and just helps open up conversations that might not have been had so early. So I think that's a real key thing for us. That's being actively encouraged. And I think it fits with our culture, and it fits better with perhaps the Gen Z mentality as well of the co-creation. You know, we can find a problem together and solve it together, or at least work towards finding solutions.
I absolutely love that. I love some of those things that you've highlighted there, Emma. That regular drumbeat of kind of that mental health conversation through those emails that go out. We know how powerful those are. They may feel, and if they were just a standalone single email, it wouldn't do a huge amount, but it's about being consistent, and it's about doing it regularly. And actually by doing that subliminally, you're starting to break down that stigma. So that is so powerful in saying, as a business, and particularly a business that, you know, the first time we spoke, you actually said, the people within my organization, they are high flyers. Before coming here, they have never, ever failed. But in this industry, they are going to be challenged, and they will at points fail. And actually helping these folks to then start to support one another, to create that powerful kind of cohort, which is filled with connections, that is going to be so powerful. And the fact that we had the opportunity to come in and work with you in the first 2 weeks with your graduates joining, we had that mental health awareness training. It was a half-day training. It was a big undertaking, but the fact that you as a business invested in that was amazing. But what I found so interesting as well was working with these guys fresh out of university, and they knew more about mental health than a lot of kind of more senior managers do. They felt more comfortable having the conversation, or certainly it appeared that way. And I think the fact that a business is making this a priority at the start of this journey, where you're bringing in these high flyers, but you know they are going to be under the cosh, it shows that you are really supporting that generation. And also, I think just saying, look, we appreciate that challenges will arise during time. So in terms of kind of setting kind of workforces up for success, so that they can enjoy the first step in their business landscape. Quickly coming back to you, Emma, as business supporting Generation Z, has this evolved since you kind of over the 10 years that you've been doing this? Obviously, you said initially you were working with millennials on that transition into the workplace. How has your kind of training and support evolved as a business, or certainly in your role over the past kind of 10 years to now support Generation Z as they make that transition?
I think that we are able to work in a much more collaborative way, and it's something that is definitely particularly when it comes to early careers, we're just able to establish a much better, more open connection in the first place. So we stand a better chance of getting true feedback rather than, yeah, that's all good. In previous years, certainly induction programs used to focus straight on getting into the detail so that we can get people to their desks and working as soon as possible, because that's what the business needed. But now the business recognises the value of the relationships and connections around the firm, particularly in the last couple of years, and probably more so because of the pandemic. Building those connections is now front and centre of our particularly induction programs, but even with other training as well, knowing that those connections will then help learning come more naturally on the job and will complement the formal training as people find their feet.
I think that's really interesting. Focusing on those soft skills actually is upskilling them for the long term, rather than focusing on the obvious skills that are going to get people, they're going to be able to do their job straight away, but actually will they be able to do the job for the long term, because they're not actually feeling that they can be confident and comfortable opening up when maybe challenges arise. So I think that's really interesting to hear how that transition in the workplace has happened. Thomas, I'm going to throw one final question over to you. What are those things that you believe in the workplace will get the most out of you when you make your transition into the corporate world?
I would say just having like a good environment to work in, where you're comfortable with your colleagues and you can kind of say what you're thinking, and like a fulfilling, just fulfillment is basically what everyone wants, isn't it? I don't know. That's probably the top of my list personally. Nice. But it must. I mean, we're trying to group Gen Zs together, but for something like that, maybe it's more individual. Yeah, a lot of people still want deep pockets these days, don't they? Even though mine is so.
I mean, it certainly helps, but it's good to hear that actually fulfillment comes top of your list. And at the end of the day, I think for the long-term success of ourselves as individuals, that's certainly going to be a far better place to find ourselves. Jay, one kind of final question for you, I guess. Do you have any insight into kind of supporting the measures, into the best support measures that will get the best out of Gen Z in the workplace environment? What we can do to support them day to day?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, as you alluded to earlier, our mission at Imagen Insights is to help Gen Z to shape their future. I mean, the best way for them to do that is with brands and organizations, because they're the ones that are shaping countries and culture like our government only wish they could do, right? So what we do is we enable brands and organizations to enter into one-on-one conversations or to gain insight from our community. We have 17,000 Gen Z around the world. And in a nutshell, our business is built around conversation. I think historically, the big problem with brands and with organizations is that our conversations have normally been one way. It's just been us talking to them, us speaking to our employees or the people we're trying to sell to, and not actually listening to them. And I think the beautiful thing about the technology that we've built and the beautiful thing about Generation Z is that they have the technology to engage in a two-way conversation with you from all around the world. So you no longer need them in your workplace to have that conversation. I think whether it's in your workplace or just genuinely trying to understand what this demographic thinks of your organization or would want from your organization, the best way to do that is to have the conversation. And I know it's scary, it's terrifying, right? Imagine having a conversation with somebody and hearing their opinion about us. What about if their opinion is something we don't like? It's good, it helps growth. And I think the best thing that any organization can do, whether it's brand or a company or a big conglomerate, is have a two-way conversation with these people, shut up and listen. And I promise you, the things that we will learn when we listen are a lot more than when we learn when we're just constantly talking. It's something I'm having to learn because, as you guys can guess, I'm a bit of a chatterbox. Definitely got into trouble at school for it, but and at university. But I think if you can engage in a two-way conversation with Gen Z, you will learn a lot, and it will help your organization. So I think conversation is key.
How have you developed your community of Gen Zers? Can I ask?
Good question, Thomas. So we pay people really, really well. So in our community, we get paid for every insight you provide. And the more insights you provide, basically, once you get to 10 insights, the amount you get paid jumps up. That happens to get 20, 30, 40. So what we realized when we looked at the data, the more people we paid, the more people they invited into the community, because they were like, yo, this is real. I'm getting paid to work with brands, I'm working with PepsiCo, I'm working with Amazon Prime Video, this is cool. Then they invited their friends. So what we did then, we then created a way for you to get paid for when your friends join the community. So you invite somebody to the community, they complete their first brief, they get paid, you get paid, and then you continue to get paid every single time you complete a brief. So it's really just paying people well and listening to them. We have a lot of conversations. We have a community chat side of our platform where they just tell us, hey, this is trash, I hate it, change this. I'm like, cool, we'll listen, we'll change, we'll adapt. And yeah, it's good. It's a good thing. I love what we do.
I love that. And I think what's really interesting, Jay, about what you've just said is about, as a business organization, speaking to them and being open to hearing what they have to say. From everything I'm hearing, Generation Z are probably going to be a lot more honest. And maybe that's because they don't feel that they have to impress everyone, because they're not maybe trying to get their name in shining lights. They just want to be honest and make sure that they're having that fulfillment from their career. So having that two-way conversation, we've talked a lot about Generation Z wanting to be collaborative. And I think collaborative in the workplace as well is an important place to be, because then you can know as a business, what are we doing to support these individuals? But it's also great to know that as a business, you will hear from them honestly and openly. So yeah, really, really fantastic insight across the board for all three. So thank you so much, guys, for taking the time out of your busy days. Now, we always finish each of our Walk the Talk podcasts by asking our guests to share their 3 well-being non-negotiables. And now these things will be very individual for each of you. So I'll be really interested to hear what comes up. I'll give you a current one of mine at this point in time, and it actually comes down to picking up a book and putting down technology before I go to sleep. I find it really supports my sleep. So for me, I believe I can cope with whatever life throws at me, so long as I spend at least 10 minutes reading each night before I go to bed. It just clears the mind, helps me sleep. So I would love to hear 3 of yours, guys. So Emma, I'll come to you first. What is it that helps you feel more balanced day to day? What is your wellbeing non-negotiables?
I think that I can cope with anything so long as I have at least one plan-free weekend a month. It sounds like that shouldn't be too hard at the moment, but even just I'm quite a spontaneous person. I like to have some free time where I could just say, do you know what, I fancy doing this. That's really, really important for me. I have these things that I've started putting in the last year or so, musical interludes, where I have to each week, at least once, stick on a little playlist that I've kind of built up over the years. So whether I'm cooking or putting away washing or whatever it is, even if I don't feel like it to begin with, I always end up singing and dancing by the end. So they have to be upbeat and kind of something you can move to. And then I've been keeping a gratitude diary almost every day for just over 3 years. And so that is something that I like to flick back through from time to time as well, just to remind myself, even if I had a rubbish day and can't think of anything to put down today, I look back through and then think, actually, sometimes I'm just grateful that that day was brilliant. So yeah, that's something that always makes me feel a lot better.
Absolutely love that. So we've got music, we've got free time, and we've got gratitude from Emma. Jay, do you mind telling us 3 of yours?
Oh, Emma, those are good, man. I can't follow those up, dude. Like, what is that? Okay, so what am I? Sleep. That is numero uno. All my days, I love to sleep. But it was only about 2 years ago that I began to realize that I was going to bed too late. So now I shifted my bedtime forward. So I'm in bed by 9, sleep by 10. So I can get up at 6 a.m. and don't feel like an absolute zombie. So yeah, so sleep is number 1. And then having activities that I do in the evening when I first get home from work that stretch the way I think. So I started learning the piano a couple of years ago and learning Spanish. So I do those every single day when I get in. It's probably only 10, 15, 20 minutes for each, but it just, every single day it's stretching me. Currently learning a classical piece by Max Richter, and it's literally an absolute nightmare to learn, but it's amazing because it just really stretches the way I think, which is great. So sleep and then doing something that stretches me every single day. And then similar to you, Sean, reading. I love to read. I think when I was young, I didn't read enough. And now I just, when I get into bed, same as you, phone is off at 9 o'clock. And then I spend that last hour before I go to sleep, just devouring a book. When I find a good book, I read it really, really quickly as well. So yeah, reading a great one.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jay. So we've got sleep, we've got that personal development being stretched, and we've got reading. Thomas, over to you. What's your well-being non-negotiables?
My most important is the same as Jay's. Sleep is underrated. But it's not just about getting enough. It's about people often get too much, and then it like works the opposite way. So I try and get between 7 and 9 hours every day. Because if not, tired equals grumpy and unproductive, and that's not what you want. I make sure, like, work these days is all online, it's all on the screen. I make sure I get breaks that are away from the screen, outside. I'll go walk around the block, walk to Sainsbury's every couple of hours just to make sure I get some air. And third one is, which is kind of contradictory of the second one, a movie a week. I love films. That's my form of escapism. You guys like reading books. I like watching them. So it's kind of, yeah.
Love it. No judgment, by the way, about someone else's well-being non-negotiable. So for yours, Thomas, it's that sleep, big one for men. It's a foundational pillar. It's getting out and that downtime from screens, and it's actually that bit of escapism and losing yourself in a movie. So that is fantastic. Well, a huge thank you to all our guests for your time and insight today, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Next month, it's International Women's Day, and our Walk the Talk will be shining a light on women in the workplace. We very much hope to see you there. Finally, if you would like to discuss how to support your people in the workplace, then please do reach out to us at Point 3 Wellbeing. We would be happy to help. But folks, that's all for now. Be well, be happy, be you. Thanks so much, guys, and have a lovely rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.